Once again, thanks so much for being here. My name is Alexandra Petrosano. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the National Workplace Mental Health Trainer here at CMHA National. And today we are, as I just said, going to be chatting a little bit about some boundary encouraging behavior, where I think, we can all kind of appreciate that, this conversation is more important than ever. As we explore, more flexible and really kind of virtual led landscapes. And even if we are working from a more a kind of traditional model, we also know that we're, so connected to one another, to our phones, to our laptops, very technologically driven. And so it is a bit more difficult these days to kind of fight the urge to, stay connected as well. So today we're going to be talking about some strategies to help for a number, of different environments. At the end of our time together, we'll have some question and answer sort of period. So feel free to pop the questions that you may have into that Q&A box. So specifically, we've got an area for those questions. If you scroll to either the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on where that navigation bar is, you should see that box labeled Q&A. You can click that and pop your questions in there. But there is also the chat feature if you just had a sort of general thought that you wanted to share. And when there is that kind of mini opportunity to participate and reflect, if you feel comfortable doing so, you can do it in that chat function there. For those folks on the line who do require closed captions, you can also turn those on in that same navigation bar by clicking the sort of CC symbol there, and that will show that live transcription for you as well. So having said that, we can just kind of dive right in here. So boundaries and well-being, why are boundaries important to our mental health protection? Well, really at the end of the day, setting boundaries at work is a really essential element of our mental health protection, where, essentially a boundary is an expectation that we kind of set in order to protect our time and our emotional, our mental, and even, sometimes our physical well-being. Where, when we set them, we are hopefully over time, creating space for us to feel a bit, more safe and more comfortable. Where, if you think about it, we spend so much of our time in the workplace, about 1/3 of our lives, actually. And so, in saying that, we also find that this is still the place that we have some of the hardest time setting those limits. We don't want to disappoint our colleagues. We don't want to have this, represent how capable we are. We don't want to upset anybody. And I completely appreciate that. But, this is that space that, since we are spending so much of our time here, it is really important for us to employ those boundaries where possible to protect ourselves. And unfortunately, research is saying that sometimes, we are kind of not doing this, where about 1 in 4 working Canadians report experiencing burnout at work. And, not setting these clear boundaries can certainly contribute to, that statistic and that feeling in our environments. So, why are boundaries important in responding to this risk? Well, when we have clear boundaries, we can better manage that urge that I was chatting about earlier, that urge to constantly be connected and be on. And this refers to this kind of telepressure that we are sometimes facing, which is this sort of persistent feeling to, respond to work-related communications, whether that's an email or a text or a phone call, as quickly as possible, regardless of the time or the importance of that message. And so it's important for us to sort of challenge that initial impulse and hopefully then avoid taking on too much responsibility at once. It can also help us to have a clear separation of our work and our personal lives, which allows us to truly rest and recharge when that time does come, where, as I just said, lots of us more often than ever before are, living in the same spaces in which they work. And so it's really important for us to have that clear separation where, I'm sure you can appreciate that balance is a really essential element for long-term well-being and satisfaction in both our work and our home spaces. And finally, when we employ some of these boundaries, we reduce the stress of feeling overwhelmed by all of these responsibilities and, sort of move away from that kind of burnout risk. Um, it's also really important to think about how, important and how useful boundary setting can be if we speak about, self-care and more specifically, acts of self-care in the workplace, where when we think about what the core of self-care is, it's these, consistent acts of treating ourselves with compassion, with kindness, with patience, with listening to our needs and responding to what those needs might be, and really kind of being either proactive or reactive to what our bodies and our minds are telling us. And so very often in the workplace context, then it includes that boundary setting, in order to make space for us to practice, those self-care strategies when things are starting to feel a bit more difficult or a bit unmanageable. And so, specifically, what does that look like in the workplace? Well, we're going to chat about that in just a second. And I also want to really sort of emphasize that there are lots of forms of boundary setting that we can take. And, it takes us kind of just applying what might work best for us in our workplaces, our working styles, the styles of our colleagues. But we'll talk specifically about a couple of strategies during our time together that are going to highlight three specific areas. One being digital boundaries, so those limits on when and how we use those digital tools that can be very positive and can contribute to more efficient work, of course. Email, messaging apps, phones. Of course, there's lots of value that come through these avenues. We'll also chat a little bit about some time-based boundaries, so things that we can do to establish time for both work-related tasks as well as time for our personal lives. And then we'll also chat a little bit about the benefit of both of these spaces and how they can employ this positivity in terms of emotional boundaries, whether that's managing our emotional involvement in work-related interactions and how to effectively communicate when we need to protect that time and energy for ourselves. And so, as we will over time explore together, it isn't just about, saying no all of the time. That's not what boundary setting is. But really, instead, it's about reflecting on if saying yes to a certain task will prove to be too taxing on our overall mental health and making the really kind of empowering decision to protect that time and that energy and our emotions. Where when we do this, we aim to reduce our stress, improve our productivity, increase our balance, enhance our well-being, and maybe even build, stronger interpersonal relationships, when we openly communicate our boundaries with one another and allow others the space to share those boundaries, for us as well. In saying all of this, of course, it's important for us to identify maybe when it might be time for us to employ some of these boundaries. And so I wanted to chat a little bit about, some signs and symptoms about when it might be time for us to employ those boundaries. And in saying that, of course, this can apply in a variety of different spaces, in terms of our mental health in general. And so I really do urge you to kind of pay attention to, what our bodies and our minds might be telling us, in terms of it being time to us, for us to maybe kind of reflect on when we maybe need a little bit of additional care. But more specifically, in terms of boundary setting, I wanted to chat a little bit about, recognizing the need in that space. So you might notice elements of kind of persistent fatigue creeping into our everyday lives. If we're constantly feeling very drained, even after a full night's sleep or even some time away from the workplace, it could indicate that chronic stress and a lack of boundary setting maybe around our workload or our working hours. We might also find more frequently that we're feeling a bit overwhelmed. So, small things even in our day-to-day lives start to feel quite overwhelming. Your manageable threshold for stress maybe is a lot shorter. Some of those smaller things start to pile up. Maybe you're even feeling a bit more frustrated than usual. Maybe you're finding it a bit difficult to focus on any one task because you feel like there's just so many things to focus on at once. Anything that points to our mental resources being extended could be a sign as well. Maybe we're feeling a bit of anxiety around checking messages. So, that sort of feeling in our stomach when we check messages at the start of a day to see what's waiting for us. Or, every time your phone pings, later on in the evening, dreading what that message might be. Any of these things can kind of signal that work levels have either become unmanageable or maybe even crept too far into our personal time. Over time, of course, this can also translate into a general kind of loss of interest or motivation. When you're no longer motivated by tasks or goals that once inspired us and charged us in our workspaces, it might indicate some of that, emotional or overload burnout that we were just talking about. This is especially true when the workplace is our stress, where sometimes we might disconnect or disengage as a strategy to protect ourselves. We might find that we are, neglecting even just our basic personal needs because we just feel like work is the priority. You're finding that work is consistently overriding some of those needs. Maybe you're missing meals, you're skipping exercise, maybe you're sidelining interpersonal relationships in your life. It might be time for us to really kind of recalibrate on what's important for us. And finally, and I think, lots of us can relate to this if boundary setting is something that we are struggling with, which is that difficulty fully disconnecting after our work hours have completed. If your work tasks are constantly on your mind, even when you're not on the clock, or you're finding yourself regularly, opening that laptop back up late into the night, it's definitely that sign that we might need to set firmer boundaries, even with ourselves, around that work-life balance. And so if you're noticing any of these signs, of course, I wanted to provide you with just a couple of, starting points that we can think about in terms of encouraging some boundary setting behavior within our workspaces. And so we're going to focus on, 3 specific spaces. The first being those digital boundaries that we were just talking about earlier. The second being some strategies that can help us to, re-influence or focus more on this kind of self-care strategy that we were talking about in terms of taking very kind of intentional breaks. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with some strategies for being able to effectively communicate some of these boundaries. So how do we go about sharing these boundaries with those around us? And so let's start with some of these digital boundaries. So there's lots that we can do. And again, I really do encourage you to explore what feels like it works for you and your working style and the elements of technology that are available to you in your workplaces. But, at a kind of higher level, things like setting working hours for our day, if this level of flexibility is possible, or, communicating what those hours are. And we see even from a larger kind of organizational approach, lots of organizations or folks are choosing to add even just notes to their email signature with their typical office hours. These are my core hours. If you are receiving this message outside of your hours, you're not expected to respond if the message is sent outside of those hours. Some organizations are also thinking of employing kind of turnaround times on emails. So, 24 to 48 hour turnaround times to reduce that pressure that lots of us feel like we have to respond to a message as soon as it finds its way into, our inboxes. We can also block out chunks of time in our calendar to focus on specific tasks. So maybe we have, specific administrative hours. Maybe we have reviewing hours. We have planning hours, co-working hours. What can we do for ourselves to set ourselves up for success and efficiency, during the day? Where, the kind of other side of this is this risk of feeling as though we can successfully multitask a bunch of different things at once, where unfortunately, research has shown that multitasking isn't as efficient as we think it is. What's actually happening when we think that we are multitasking is that we're actually switching back and forth between tasks, which is not only not very efficient, but it can actually be quite stressful for us to have to constantly be refocusing our energy and our focus on different tasks. The final thing that I wanted to chat about in terms of these kind of working hours or focused time conversation is scheduling something for ourselves at the end of the day. So, what this does is it allows us to have something intentional that we've planned and that we've looked forward to that kind of signals maybe that it's the end of the day. And especially if we maybe make this plan with somebody else. So maybe this is a regular phone call that I have with a friend at the same time, or a planned, walk around the block at the end of the day. If we've committed to something at 5:30 or 6 o'clock every day, it makes us more likely for us to realize the time, stop work to attend that commitment that we've already made, whether that's a commitment with ourselves or with somebody else. This kind of second space that I wanted to talk about in terms of digital boundaries is things that we can do to kind of manage the flow of notifications that we're receiving throughout the day. So for example, we might choose to, customize or mute or even turn off notifications for things that are not immediately relevant or important to us. So for example, maybe there was a meeting we were invited to that we're not able to attend. Can we turn off those notifications, as they're coming through live, and then maybe review them at a time where, it's more, makes more sense for us in our calendars. Can we also turn off notifications outside of working hours, excluding some of those emergency situations, but where we can we do this for ourselves? Can we also make sure to, not check devices outside of those hours either, or especially when we're maybe taking intentional time away from the workplace, like, when we're on vacation, for example. And can we then also utilize features of our applications for that focused time when we do enter that focused space? So, utilizing features like busy or do not disturb, or even delayed send on emails, or maybe even share your calendar with others so that they can see when you are and are not available for that sort of back and forth communication. We can also, navigate the flow of the messages that are that we're receiving throughout the day to be more effective. So, navigate and manage them as they come in. So things like making sure to utilize labeling the urgency of emails, low, medium, high priority, so that when I know that I receive a high priority email, maybe this is something that does require me to take a peek when I have a second, versus something that, has a bit of a longer leeway time. Or again, scheduling time to specifically look at and respond to those emails when we can make that time. The second area that I wanted to chat about with you was the recommendation to take those really kind of intentional breaks. So, when we find the time to do this, or rather, we want to try our best to make the time for these intentional breaks, it can do a lot for our mental health, of course. Booking a lunch break into our calendar and really kind of honoring that. Taking smaller moments for ourselves if we can't take those, larger chunks throughout the day, where unsurprisingly, research has shown that taking regular breaks is a lot more productive than working without stopping. And there's this sort of biological rhythm within us, which is called our sort of ultradian cycle, which in casual terms is this kind of rhythm that says that every 90 or so minutes we do need that break in order to kind of rest and refocus our energy. So there are, even small ways that we can kind of give back to ourselves in these moments. For example, scheduling meetings for 50 minutes instead of the full hour, or having them start at, 10 past the hour, are ways for us to find even just those micro moments to do very simple things like stand up for a couple minutes, grab a coffee, grab a snack before we meet, with a colleague again. We can also have clear agendas for meetings, so so that we all come to the meeting, ready to converse on very focused topics. Essentially, the key is to take the right kind of break when we have that time, and doing things that are either relaxing, like sitting in a quiet area or reading a book or eating something nourishing, where this will bring this kind of sense of calm and serenity. Or maybe we need something a bit more stimulating, like practicing a new skill, chatting with a colleague or going for a walk. This will leave us feeling a bit more energized and confident. So essentially, the key is to take the time to really explore doing different activities and finding opportunities for both either relaxation or a bit more of that energizing, depending on where we find that we're really flourishing. The key is to really see what works for you and when, and really kind of lean into that based off of what our body is telling us that we need in that moment. And so finally, I wanted to provide you with some strategies for being able to effectively communicate some of our boundaries when we do work to kind of employ them. Where really, clarity is key. We want to be able to clearly state what we need and why it's important for our productivity and for our mental health. So, it could be as easy as us saying, hey, you know what? I focus best when I have dedicated time to work on projects. So I'm going to be turning off my notifications between, 10 to 12. But, I'll be available after that if you do need anything. And if you noticed, in that statement, we are working to use these sort of I statements. And this helps to frame the boundary in a way that is about your needs rather than, making demands on or, for others. So, it could be something like saying, I've noticed that I need some time at the beginning of the day to get organized and to get ready and to be in that good kind of frame of mind. So I'm going to be blocking, an hour of each day between, 9 and 10 to do this. But of course, if something urgent comes up, I'd love a heads up so that I can plan accordingly. And maybe we accent that by putting that, admin time into our calendar so folks know that we are really focused on that specific task. We can also, make sure to acknowledge requests that come in, but, be realistic and when we're not able to take that on, but, maybe then communicate that if things are not aligning, we can still show that we're supportive and available, within our limits. So, if we've not had a second to reflect, we can just say, hey, just wanted to let you know that I did receive your message. I have a couple of other things on the go today, but, I'll respond when I have a moment to think things over. Or, if we have had the time to think and things aren't quite aligning with our current responsibilities, we might say, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. I did receive your message and I'd love to help, but, I'm currently focused on, another kind of deadline or something else with a bit of a higher urgency. Is this something that we can either schedule for next week, or can I help to kind of delegate this to somebody who maybe can assist you? So, essentially what we want to do is make sure to communicate clearly, effectively, and as soon as possible. And, set these clear expectations and really sort of socialize this common practice of, doing this with the team. So that what we can also do then is acknowledge when other people feel comfortable setting their boundaries to hopefully make this something that we all practice regularly. And, with communication, of course, does come the reminder to ask for help when we need it. If we are feeling overwhelmed and we need a helping hand, I do encourage you to ask for it, whether that's asking for more clarification on expectations, or if we just need to reach out to ask if someone can help you if things do feel a bit unmanageable on your own. This is something that we need to do for ourselves, and know that sometimes our boundaries might be exceeded, despite us initially feeling as though we can take something on. And that's okay. We want to be able to say yes to tasks, but sometimes, realistically, it's not possible for us. And so, we want to be able to kind of feel confident enough to openly communicate, to kind of circle back to say, maybe things are feeling a bit difficult to take on. And is there somebody else, who can assist me through? And, an extension of that, of course, could be if we need additional support that maybe even extends beyond that, which we'll talk about in a second when we talk about some resources that exist in NFT or even in our communities as well. But before that, I wanted to leave you with a little bit of a moment of reflection here. And so, I encourage everybody on the line to take a moment to kind of reflect on how we can set boundaries to protect our mental health and maintain that balance over time. And so I urge you, and if you feel comfortable, please feel free to share. But if not, I completely appreciate this as more of an internal reflection. But I really do encourage you to think about even just one boundary setting strategy that you could try soon, whether that's one that we chatted about together or one that maybe came to mind as you were thinking more about what might work for you. Think about something that you can try soon. We're near the end of the week, so maybe take the weekend to kind of think about something that you can bring into your next work week and beyond. So, for example, it might be, taking that time to sort of intentionally log off work, or, setting that full lunch break without checking those emails. What are even the small things that we can do for ourselves to help to employ that boundary encouraging behavior? And so I'll just kind of let you sit with that for a couple of minutes. You might consider things like, what specific time or situation do you find most challenging to set some of those boundaries? How might setting this boundary benefit you and your team? Or what support or resources do you think that you might need in order to encourage that, within yourself or even somebody else? And I see here in the chat, scheduling those intentional breaks and lunch, as I often lose track of time. Yeah, sometimes, we don't even notice what time it is. We're just kind of working away, and before we know it, it's 1:30 and we've not even had a sip of water or a bite to eat. So having even just those reminder pings to say, hey, it's lunchtime in 10, 15 minutes, it might allow us to kind of remember, the time that it is, and grab a drink or stand up for a couple minutes. Yeah, finding a walking partner to step out for 20 minutes. Yeah. Again, if we have that commitment with somebody else to say, hey, it's time for us to take a lap around the block, we're more likely to notice that time. Yeah, scheduling dog walks, removing email notifications in the evenings and weekends. Yeah, if it's an emergency, they'll find you. Yeah, and I love that. Thanks so much, Jessica. And defining that end of day work routine. Yeah, I work from home, and so it can be hard to disengage. Yeah, so we see that kind of virtual commute conversation, right? Where we, at the end of the day, we knew we had to drive home, so we'd leave, so we know it's time for us to kind of sit in the car, listen to a podcast. So maybe we bring that to our work, to our home workspaces as well, to say, you know what, it's the end of the day. It's time for me to do those things that I knew to do when I had a commute in front of me. And finally, taking a moment to reflect on how we're doing each morning. Yeah, so before we start, think about our working levels and whether or not we can take things on. So thank you so much for sharing those in the chat here. And again, I do encourage you to pop any questions that you might have in the chat as well. But before that, I wanted to just kind of remind you of some Not Myself Today resources that also exist that can support you on this conversation a little bit further. A reminder of some really fantastic modules where you can find some important information in that can help you, whether it's managing your emotions or addressing some of that stress that comes with maybe not setting those boundaries, or working to create that positive culture where we can all sort of collectively increase that shared accountability to practice boundary setting and the open communication that allows us to feel a bit more comfortable asking for help when we need it. Or again, that kind of emotional regulation sort of piece that allows us to feel a bit more confident, even in ourselves, to be able to kind of master, what it is that we're feeling, identify those triggers, and know when it's time for us to employ those strategies. And another kind of final reminder, if you've not checked out the manager portal yet, I do absolutely encourage you to do so, because there is a really fantastic and helpful course in there for any of our leaders on the line. That is our Managing Workloads and Burnout module. So here you will be able to kind of model practices that also positively impact, work-life balance and workload management for your peers and also for yourself. Finally, there are also some really fantastic resources that exist in our communities as well that can help you if you are experiencing some increased stress or overwhelm, whether that is, Bounce Back, which is our free skill building program to, manage, anxiety, stress, or worry, whether that's CMHA itself or, that 988 is a really fantastic resource too if you're experiencing, that stress and you need someone to chat with. There are lots of resources that exist in our communities as well. So I do want to remind you that those resources exist as well. So thank you so much for being here for our quick little session here about boundary setting. If you are interested in learning a bit more about this topic, I do welcome you to invite us into your organization to chat about this a bit further. At the end of this webinar, there will be a survey that will pop up in which you can share your thoughts on the session. And if you're feeling comfortable or open to discuss this further, you can also indicate that you would like to have a chat with us and we can connect with you there. But if there are any questions, and I don't see any in the chat just now, I'll pause here just to see if there's any sort of final thoughts or questions that anybody on the line might have here. Okay, I don't see any here, but if you feel more comfortable asking me offline, please feel free to connect with me on the email that you see there. You are also welcome to connect with us at Not Myself Today at cmha.ca, and we can assist you there. But thanks so much for allowing me to take 30 minutes of your day. I hope you are able to grab a drink, have a snack after this, and maybe employ some boundaries for yourself moving forward. But thanks so much for being here today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and upcoming weekend as well. Take care, everyone.